Hello, welcome to Cardboard History. I'm David. Today I want to share with you the latest card that I've picked up for my Ken Burns collection and share with you the story about a lesser known player who had a significant impact on the history of baseball and specifically the role of relief pitcher. This player is Joe Page. And the card that I picked up, this is card number 34 out of 425 for my Ken Burns collection. Let me turn around the camera here and I'll show the card and then share a little bit about Joe's story. This is a 1951 Joe Page. 1951 Bowman. Here he is pitching for the Yankees. This card was produced shortly after he was released by the Yankees. And on the back, with a little bit of the wax stain on the bottom, it talks about his role as a relief pitcher. He was one of the most valuable men on the Yankees' 1949 championship drive. And here it even mentions that he saved many games for the Yankees, which is a little bit of an interesting vernacular since the save did not become an official statistic in baseball until 1966. So Joe Page played a significant role for the Yankees and their championship teams of the 40s. Put the card back here. And a little bit of his story. He grew up in Pennsylvania. He was the oldest of 7 children, and he grew up in a coal mining town. So his desire was to get out of the coal mining. From a very young age, he would go with his father to the coal mines to help pick out impurities from the coal that was brought up from the mines. And he was well on his way to going towards playing professional baseball when he was in a serious car accident that significantly damaged his leg, broke his leg in several locations, and so he had to put his desire for pitching and playing professional baseball on hold for a while, and he continued to work in the mines. And that additional time working in the mines really helped strengthen his arm. He picked up a few miles per hour on his fastball, and a few years later, he was signed by the Yankees in 1940 and spent a few years working his way up through their minor league system until he was officially brought on their team in 1944. Now, he came onto the team during the Second World War, and part of the reason for him being able to break in was not only his skill, but also the roster that had just been completely decimated by the war effort. So the lack of available men to field a team brought Joe Page up, and he wasn't called on to serve in the war because of his leg injury. There's a great article, if you want to learn more about Joe Page, written by Mark Stewart on SABR. And some of the things I'll reference I have written down here from his article, which is a lot more in depth. But his leg injury, he would still pick some shrapnels out of his leg that were coming up to the surface years later after his accident. So his leg was in really bad shape, and he also suffered from ulcers. And these two things really kept him from being unable to serve in the military. However, he was able to pitch, and when he came up with the Yankees in 1944, he really came on strong for the manager, Joe McCarthy. And his first season, he was named to the All-Star team, and he started out very strong. He won 5 of his first 6 games, but then his next 6 decisions were all losses, and he kind of peaked at the beginning of the season, and then after the All-Star game really fell off and was sent back down to the minor leagues. He had a reputation of being a hard drinker and would stay out really late, kind of following the track of many famous baseball players who had a hard time balancing working on the field and enjoying the nightlife. And this would be a constant struggle for him and his ability to really be there for his team versus staying out late and partying. In 1945, he missed the first few months with a sore arm and came in and mostly played in relief. And then again in 1946, really struggled with some injuries and got into a lot of disagreements with Joe McCarthy, and eventually, early on in that season, McCarthy left the team. He stepped away, and Page managed to be a member of that roster in '46, but only had a 5-4 record. The next year, 1947, the Yankees brought in Bucky Harris to be the manager, and Harris definitely used Page to his strengths, but it took a little while to get there. In fact, Page was about one pitch away from seeing the end of his career. The game was in May of 1926. The season had started slowly, and the Yankees took the first few games of a series against the Red Sox, and in the final game of the series, the rookie Frank Shea was getting cuffed around, and Harris sent for Page with no one out in the bottom of the third and 2 men on. Now, Page had been in 6 games to this point, and the Yankees had lost all 6 games that he had been in. And when Page came in, the first batter reached on an error, so bases loaded, and he proceeds to throw 3 straight balls. So there he is, bases loaded, 1 out, and a 3-0 count. And at this point, Harris later admitted that Page was 1 pitch away from being sent back to the minors, and in fact, he had already called the general manager and put in to tell him to put in the paperwork for Page to be demoted. However, with a 3-0 count, Page fired a pair of fastballs right across the plate, and then got the batter to strike out on a curve. He was able to get out of that inning by fanning the next batter, Bobby Doerr. And then he finished the rest of the game off and learned after the game that he had his papers had been put in for him to be demoted. So he comes in, saves the game, learns that he's going to be demoted to the minors because the paperwork had been started when he was at that 3-0 count. But Harris called Larry MacPhail, the owner, and told him to rescind the papers and that Page would be staying with the team. So that was a significant turning point, literally 1 pitch away from being sent back to the minors. And for the rest of that season, Page was a force to be reckoned with. He was brought out 49 more times that season, and all but 1 of those came in relief. So he really locked in his ability to come in to difficult situations and pitch in relief. The Yankees won the pennant that year, and largely due to Page. One sports writer summed it up saying, if you're going to beat the Yankees, you have to get your runs in before the 7th inning, or else you get Page. Page's new role was recognized that year as he was called to get the save in the All-Star game with the American League up 2-1. He came in and pitched the final inning in a third and got the save for the American League. That year, he got the nickname Fireman Page, which was for 2 reasons. First of all, because of his ability to come into difficult situations and put out fires in the game. And the other reason was because of the overcrowded housing. Page had to room with a fireman. Fireman's name was Dan Malkin, and Malkin had a FDNY jacket which Page would wear every day to the stadium. And so he would show up to the stadium wearing a fireman's jacket and just became known as Fireman Page. He finished that season with a 2.48 ERA, and going back retroactively, he would have qualified for the league best 17 saves that year. He actually finished in 4th place in the MVP voting behind DiMaggio, who won that year, and Williams came in 2nd. And it was the first time ever that a pitcher who primarily pitched in relief finished in the top 5. So Page was really blazing trails by the way that he brought importance to this role of being a reliever. The Yankees made it to the World Series that year. Page saved the opener, pitched 3 scoreless innings in the Game 3. He lost Game 6 in relief, but then in the deciding Game 7, he came in the 5th inning and got the batters out in order in the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th inning before getting a double play to clinch the Game 7 for the Yankees. That year, in the offseason, a influential magazine Sportfolio named Page its Professional Athlete of the Year. So he didn't win the MVP, but he was named Professional Athlete of the Year in 47 because of his heroics in the World Series. 1948, he was again sharp during the season's first 3 months, leading up to the All-Star break, but then really fell off in the second half. The second half of the season, his ERA was over 8, and the Yankees fell out of the pennant contention that year. The next year, the Yankees replaced their manager again. This time, they brought in Casey Stengel. And Stengel had a unique way of getting the right matchups that he wanted for his pitchers, and that included Page. He brought Page in a record 60 times in relief, and that year he saved 27 games, which was a new record for Major League Baseball. Even though saves hadn't been recorded up to this point, retroactively, Baseball Reference and other places have gone back and determined saves. And so the number of saves that Page would have had that year was 27. The previous record was 22, set by Furpo Marbury, who played for Washington in 1926. So a record that has stood for 20 years, even though it wasn't really a record because they weren't tracking that stat. He came in and really kind of set the league on fire with his role of closing down games. With those 27 saves, he was 17 ahead of the runner-up that year. So really was the only pitcher in this era kind of leading the charge to that degree of having 60 innings of relief. Nowadays, a lot more common to see players come in and pitch that many games in relief. The record for most saves in a season is 62 by Francisco Rodriguez. So even if Page would have won all 60 of his, or saved all 60 of his appearances, he wouldn't have even touched the current record, which shows a little bit of the more significance that relief pitchers and closers have come to play in the game today. So 1949, Page was again fantastic, finished third in the MVP voting that year behind Ted Williams, who won, and Phil Rizzuto. This season was a close race between the Red Sox and Yankees, and Page would play a significant role in that. With 2 games to go in the year, the Red Sox were up 1 game on the Yankees, and the two squads had 2 games remaining against each other. In the first game, the 3rd inning, the Yankees pitcher gave up a 2-0 lead, and the Casey Stengel brought in Page. Page walked in 2 runs, and Stengel came out to the mound, and Joe assured him that he would be able to take care of the rest of the order. And that's what he did. He managed to get out of that inning and pitched the rest of the game, pitching 1-hit ball, and the Yankees managed to tag on a few runs to get the 5-4 victory. With that victory for Page, the standings were tied, and the Yankees would win the next game and go on to head back to the series, another series that Page would just pitch phenomenally in. The series was 1-4 by the Yankees, and Page pitched the 4 2/3 innings in Game 3 and got the win. And then he saved Game 5, the deciding game, by striking out Duke Snider, Jackie Robinson, and Gil Hodges in the 9th inning to clinch the 4-1 series win. He received the inaugural Babe Ruth World Series MVP award that year. So while he never won an MVP award in the regular season, he was Sportsman of the Year and World Series MVP. That winter, heading into the 1950 season, Page received a huge salary, largest salary ever for a relief pitcher, of $35,000. However, heading into that next season in the spring, early on, he was pitching in both parts of a doubleheader. Something popped in his shoulder or elbow, and from that point forward, he was never really quite the same. He could never throw the fastball again. He tried to reinvent himself as a slider pitcher and tried to rely more on his spitball, but really he never was able to get back to that same form that he had before after that injury. And eventually, in 1954, came back and pitched a few games for the Pirates, but that was about the end of his career. So that's the story of Joe Page, and one of the reasons why I wanted to pick up a card for him for this Ken Burns collection He does appear briefly in the Ken Burns documentary because of the role that he played in the 47 and the 49 World Series, getting saves and victories and helping the Yankees to win those 2 World Series. I want to thank you all for tuning in and learning a little bit about Joe Page with me. This was a fun player to learn about that I didn't know a whole lot about before picking up this card and digging into it. I'm really looking forward to heading to Strongsville about a week away. Hopefully I'll be able to have some time to put out a video and share what I'm looking to pick up at Strongsville. And I have a few cards that will hopefully arrive from a recent auction that I won in time for me to get those and bring to Strongsville to send to get graded. So thank you again for tuning in and watching Cardboard History.